All right, it is great to be here today. We are on our 21st lesson, and the portions that we're going to cover is 2 Corinthians chapter 8, starting in verse 16, and we're going to go all the way to chapter 9, the end of it, which is chapter 9, verse 15. And really, we're going to pick up without a topic that Pastor Weinhold introduced last week, and that is the topic of generous giving. We won't spend too much time on the particularities of giving, but cover a number of principles along the way. 2 Corinthians 8, verse 16 to 9:15, we could actually outline it in 4 parts. And these are the 4 parts. The rest of 8 that goes from 16 to 24 is Paul talking about basically accountability as they're making this collection from the saints in Macedonia, from the Christians in Corinth, and they're going to collect this bag full of money to take to Jerusalem, and the saints that are in need there, the believers. Paul wants them to know he is going to handle this responsibly. He's going to be accountable for the trustworthiness of how it's distributed. And so that's 8:16 to 8:24. He's talking about who's going to be entrusted with this bag of money. Secondly, chapter 9, verses 1 to 5, he gets into particulars. He gives us details. You know how it is when you're working for a boss and he just gives you a vague thought. Hey, go make that spreadsheet. Okay, that spreadsheet. You got any more specifics you could help me out with there? And so we got accountability at the end of 8, and in the beginning of 9, we've got particulars. These are the details. This is how it's going to go work out. And not only that, Paul's going to help them follow through on their intentions. And we'll look more closely at that. And then in 9, verse 6, all the way to 10, you have the root of giving. What kind of root? What kind of soil, ground do we want our giving to be rooted in, to be established in? Grudgingly, by compulsion, by guilt, or cheerfully, willfully, voluntarily? We'll be talking about that. And the giving that's distributed through that kind of a heart, recognizing God giveth liberally to us, results in fruit. What is the fruit? And that would finish up chapter 9, 11 to 15. So those are the 4 parts. Accountability, particulars and details, follow through on your intentions, the root of giving, and then the 4th one is the fruit of giving. As we look at 8:16 here, 8:16 starts out this way. But thanks be to God who puts the same earnest care for you into the heart of Titus. Paul had an earnest care for the Corinthians, and apparently Titus took up that same passion for ministry towards the Corinthians that Paul had. Now, Paul says, thanks be to God who put that earnest care in the heart of Titus. When you find someone who is eager for service, passionate for ministry, you say, wow, where did they get that? It could be a topic very close to home for them, but also God puts it there. We see the same thing in Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 12, where Nehemiah says, and that night, we rode around looking at the walls of Jerusalem to see how that which God had put in my heart might come to pass. And so this idea, this having a passion for ministry, to be able to reach out to others. It may be a particular ministry. Maybe you're passionate about ministry to the poor. Maybe you're passionate about ministry to those who are stuck in addiction. Maybe you're passionate about those who have rocky marriages or who have healthy marriages and you want to boost them up. Women of grace, to women, to men, to Muslims, to Jews. However it works, that God has put a passion in your heart for that particular ministry. And Paul witnessed this. Paul even talks about, for he not only accepted the exhortation, but being more diligent, he went to you on his own accord. Paul said, I remember when young Titus came and he says, I want to be apprentice, Paul. Can I be an apprentice under your care? And Paul's like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I wanted to do, babysit. But Paul took him in as an apprentice, as an intern, as someone to mentor. And Titus proved himself to Paul. This is maybe one of the reasons why Paul was so on edge when Titus went to Corinth. This is what happened. There Paul was, I believe it's in Ephesus. I'll have to look that up. But he gets word that the Christians in Corinth are not doing very well. And Paul immediately wants to respond back, wants to go back to Corinth, but he can't. His schedule won't allow for it. You know that frustration. And so Paul says, what am I going to do? And he's pacing back and forth. Titus hears him mumbling to himself, listening to him pour out his burden to the Lord. And Titus goes, excuse me, Paul, excuse me, Mr. Apostle. I was wondering if perhaps I could go to Corinth and take care of the mess for you. And Paul looks at this young lad and says, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. I tell you what, Titus, if you could go to Corinth and just be a thermometer, just find out how are they doing in regards to the gospel. Are they adhering to it, or are they trying to add things to it? Find out what the status is and come back and report to me. And Titus says, you sure you don't want me to handle it? I can talk to the elders and I'll tell them what's what and who's who. And Paul says, no. You just go be a barometer. Find out how things are blowing over there. What's the wind chill and all that. So Titus goes on this mission to Corinth, which isn't a mess. It's a big church. It's a prominent church. It's a church with a lot of activity. It's always making the headlines. It's got lots of spiritual gifts. It's got so many moving parts that we end up reading a lot about the friction that's going on. And that's the joy of a living church, is that you do have a lot of moving parts and you do end up having a lot of friction, you might say. But Titus goes there and he recognizes and sees, wow, on the whole, most people are willing to follow Paul's teaching of grace, that there isn't some supernatural knowledge that has to be earned or has to be attained to in the emptying of their mind. And so Titus had a very good report when he went back to Paul. But meanwhile, while Titus is in Corinth, Paul is waiting for him, pacing, like, where is he? You know how it is when you don't know all the data points and you start filling in the blanks, and Paul's pacing like, this is all my fault. I should have never sent him. He's like a little lamb to the lion's den. What was I thinking? Those Corinthians are going to eat him up. They're going to take hold of him and they're going to kill him and spit him out. What was I thinking? This is all my fault. Titus will abandon the mission. He'll abandon the faith. And he's thinking all these thoughts. You know how it is. You don't know what's going on, and it just defaults by gravity to the downward position. Or maybe Paul is thinking, maybe Titus has joined ship with him. Maybe the super apostles got a hold of Titus and have convinced them that there is a greater level. There is a spiritual depth yet to be attained. There is an ecstasy yet to be had by his efforts. You can imagine all kinds of harrowing scenarios that's going through Paul's mind, so that when he was at Troas and Titus wasn't there with the report, he hadn't returned, he was upset in spirit. He was troubled in spirit, to the point that even though the Lord had opened a door for the gospel of Christ to be given through Troas, Paul said, I was so troubled in heart because Titus hadn't returned that I just went on to Macedonia. I couldn't handle it. Once he was at Macedonia, Titus did show up and he's like, yo, Paul, sorry I'm late. I missed the ship. You know what I mean? And he said, listen, most of the believers in Corinth understand the gospel of Jesus Christ and they want to follow their father in the faith, namely you. And so you can write a good report back. Just give them a few directives. And so Paul was encouraged. He was relieved. He was so thankful that all that worrying and all that fretting and all that alternate scenarios that was going on in his head was for naught. And so he knew full well, man, Titus, if you could do that so faithfully, I can trust you. If I can trust you with the mess that the Corinthians had, I can trust you with the money bag. And so there it is, the great apostle Paul, who always walked in the Spirit, you might say, has to delegate. There is an importance in delegation. We see Moses, who was making all the decision for the Israelites, and he was just getting overwhelmed. He wasn't getting enough sleep. He wasn't eating healthfully. His blood pressure was going up, and it was all weighing down on him. Finally, the elders came to him and said, hey, you need to delegate. You need to get other people in on this. Oh, okay, but it seems so important, I should do it. But he ended up delegating and everything worked out. Jesus did the same thing. He could have done his own ministry, but what does he do instead? He takes these, what we'll call lesser individuals, people who aren't as experienced, aren't as trained, aren't as powerful, aren't as fluent, and he sends them out on the mission 2 by 2. And he sends you and me out on a mission to spread the good news. Talk about delegation, that Christ would delegate to the church what he could do on his own accord, what angels could do on their own accord. Here the Apostle Paul is delegating so that others might learn to step into his and replace him. Okay, verse 18. And then he's going to talk about accountability. How not only is this money bag going to be entrusted to Titus to make it all the way to Jerusalem. Talk about the importance. I remember I was in college, and this fella, this fine-looking fella, looked like Brad Pitt, came up to me, and he was selling magazine subscriptions. And I thought, oh, okay, maybe, yeah, I'll take 4 of these magazines. That would be great. And I paid him the money, and I'm sitting there waiting for the magazine to come into my mailbox. Well, I don't suppose I need to tell you that the magazines never made their way to my mailbox. I was scammed. That man was not accountable. I had no letter. He had no letter of recommendation to show me. He had no resume. If he did, it was all made up, but not by anybody I knew. And so Paul wants to take care of that. This is no magazine subscription salesman coming to your door asking for money for the saints in Judea. This is a bona fide, real life, concerned about the kingdom of God kind of guy coming to your door. And so he's going to explain it. I have sent Titus, and with him I have sent the brother whose praise is in the gospel throughout all the churches. He's been a worker of repute. Not only that, not only do I think he's a great one to be trusted with the money bag, but this is also one who was also chosen by the churches to travel with us with this gift, which is administered by us to the glory of the Lord himself, and to show your ready mind. So we got Titus, who you know full well. And we've got this other fellow whose praise is in the gospel, whom the churches themselves trust. Not only is it some hierarchical authoritarian say, trust him. I do. It could be a yes man as far as we know. But Paul says, no, it's not just a man of my choosing. It's a man of the church's choosing. It's a man of you all's choosing. And I say, yes, he is worthy of the praise that he's receiving for the gospel. And why is he telling us the resume of Titus and this man? Because he wants to avoid this. He doesn't want anyone to blame us of how this lavish gift, the collection from the Macedonians and the Corinthians, how this lavish gift is administered by us. We want to prove honorable in these things, not just in the sight of the Lord, but also in the sight of men. Here the apostle is. He is presenting mysteries of Christ to the church globally. And it's almost as if he's expecting us to take him at his word on that. But when it comes to money, he says, don't take my word on how I'm spending it and how I'm distributing it and how I'm using it. I know that the root of all evil is the love of money, and it can lead to dangerous things. And so I'm going to even hold myself accountable by employing these 2 men plus a third one that I'm going to mention. I want it to be honorable, not just in the sight of God, but in the sight of men. There are some times when you just have to take a step in the directions that you think God is leading you, because it's the honorable thing to do in the sight of God. It may not look good in the sight of men. But when it comes to money, Paul was very careful. I want to make sure it looks, I don't want to look like a TV evangelist. I don't want to look like a huckster or a magazine subscription salesman. I want God to be glorified. I want him to receive all the honor. And so he takes great pains to hold himself accountable as to how this money bag is distributed. It's amazing. So he employs Titus. He employs this fella that the churches seem to like as well. And then we have sent with them another brother whom we have often proved diligent in many things, but now much more diligent because of the great confidence which we have in you. So he's sending this third brother that they have confidence in. You've got 3 people that are going to be responsible for collecting this money, and they're going to make sure that the chain of command that is followed through until its destination. And if anyone inquires about Titus, let him know that he's my partner and fellow worker concerning you. Or if our brethren are inquired about, they are messengers, are apostles of the churches. the glory of Christ, that some of the workers for the gospel are the glory of Christ. Therefore, show to them and before the churches the proof of your love and the boasting on your behalf. To be able to prove our love, how do we show them the proof of our love? Receptivity, working with them, cooperation. So Paul is asking them, providing a resume for them so that the Corinthian church can feel, okay, we know where this money is going. We can trust the people that we're giving to it. We're not getting scammed. And it's not going to go 99% to the messengers and 1% to the Judean saints. You're going to have a good percentage make it to the saints. So there's Paul. He's talking about accountability and how he's going to deal with this money. And so if people in ministry are being held to account for their time, for their talents, for their money, it ought not to surprise them. We want to be careful that we're honorable not only in the sight of the Lord, but honorable in the sight of men. Sometimes appearances do matter. The next part is the details concerning this gift. This week I joined a gym. Oh my gosh, I can hardly lift my arms up. I joined a gym and they've been working me to death ever since. And they've been texting me and calling me, hey, tell me what you ate, what have you drank, and why are they hounding me? Because I told them of my good intentions, that I'm going to lose 30 pounds and I'm going to have defined arms. That's my goal. That's what I want to do. And they say, we'll help you do it. Oh man, I didn't know my phone would be buzzing off the hook and they would be pounding on me to... Anyway, this is what Paul is. He's a personal trainer, as it were, to the believers there in Corinth, whose intention a year ago was that we are going to give to the saints in need in Jerusalem. And so he says, now concerning the ministering to the saints, it's superfluous for me to write to you. For I know your willingness, about which I boast of you to the Macedonians. Oh yeah, she's going to lose 30 pounds. She's going to lift weights every day. Yes. And that Achaia was ready a year ago, and your zeal has stirred up the majority. That's something else, man. The idea that our zeal, that our life, that our intentions can stir others up to good works. I remember I was in a prison ministry for a couple of years, and they had in that prison ministry a thing called therapeutic community. It had success. You don't know if the success was because they pulled in the cream of the crop to participate in this program, or if it was the fact that the therapeutic community model actually worked. But the idea was you'd have about 15, 20 girls in there, and you'd have 3 core leaders who were positive, who made good things seem cool, like, yeah, to help one another, yo, that's cool. And they would create the spirit, the atmosphere for the rest of the group. As these 3 people went, so went the girls after them. And they were in prison with them. They were one of them incarnationally. Every once in a while, one gal would say, you know what would be really dope is if we hazed somebody. And these 3 leaders, one of these 3 leaders said, you know, we really ought to help them along. Wouldn't it be great if we could have them excel and actually flourish and prosper in good things? And next thing you know, all the other 14 girls are like, yeah, let's help them. That's the cool thing to do. It was really quite fascinating. Well, here we are. The Corinthians' intentions has inspired the Macedonians to give. And now Paul's hoping that the Macedonians' generosity, which they have given out of their own poverty and yet with joy, will inspire the Corinthians to follow through on their intentions. Follow through on your intentions. And so you stirred up their zeal by your intentions, and now I hope that their following through stirs you up. And he says, this is what I've done. I've sent the brethren, lest our boasting of you should be in vain in this respect, that as I said, you may be ready. Lest if some Macedonian come with me and find you unprepared, we, not to mention you, should be ashamed of this confident boasting. Therefore I thought it necessary to encourage the brethren to go to you ahead of time and prepare your generous gift beforehand, which you have previously promised, that it may be ready as a matter of generosity and not as a grudging obligation. And so Paul is saying, I'm your personal trainer, and I'm going to help you follow through on this. And I want to give you specifics on how to follow through on this. So Corinthians, let's not make a big deal of it. Let's not make it appear. He's really interested in appearances here too. He says, let's not make it appear as if I'm prying it out of you, as I'm wrenching it out of you. But this is your own intention. And so I'm going to send these brothers to help you along and to fulfill that and make sure that that's what you really want to do. You gather it all together so that when I come, I don't have to spend any time mentioning it. And it'll be efficient for the gospel. I'll actually get to speak the word of the gospel rather than trying to drum up funds. And secondly, it won't look like I'm prying it out of you to those who are looking on. It makes the gospel efficient, and it makes it appear that the gospel is not about money. Oh, that we would all take heart, not to be very mindful of that. How does this appear to the outside? Be careful of how we make our gospel presentation. So, Paul is just saying, if we can get these things in order with these three very honest and men full of integrity, so that when I come, we can focus on the gospel. Then he gives us the root of giving. But this I say, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. And he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully with much blessings. So let each one give as he purposes in his heart, not grudgingly or of necessity, not emotionally, heartstrings being tugged at, not by guilt and not by compulsion, but by purity, cheerfulness of heart. And God is able. What is God able to do? God is able to save, it says. God is able to keep, it says in Jude. And here it says, God is able to make all grace abound toward you, that at all times, having all sufficiency in all things, you may have an abundance of all good works. As it is written, he has sowed abroad, he has given to the poor, his righteousness endures forever. The whole idea of sowing is the more seeds you put out, the greater your reaping will be, the more abundant will be your harvest. It's not a one-to-one correlation on sowing. You plant 1 tomato seed and you get out 5 tomatoes, let's say. You plant 10 tomato seeds and next thing you know, you're trying to get rid of them, like knocking on your neighbor's door. Please take these tomatoes off my hands. It's because the law of sowing and reaping is you get a bigger proportion. So there you have this handful of seed. Do I hang on to it so that I might be able to eat them later? Or do I take it and I say, nope, I'm not going to use it for food now. I'm going to put it in the ground. I'm going to put it in the dirt and just hope and pray God does something with it. Sometimes that's the way our giving may feel. But you put those seeds into the ground, and in time, by the working of God, out will come a harvest. And so that's the rule for giving, it seems like. Now, this isn't to say a TV evangelist, if you give me $1, in due time, God will make it 100-fold. You'll have $100. We're going to see what the fruit is in the next section. But God is faithful. And don't give out of compulsion. Don't give grudgingly. Don't give to make it look good. That's what I know. This makes me a little nervous here too. Like, your giving has to be for the right motive, and it has to be from the right and pure heart. I'm like, oh my gosh, if you knew my heart, if you knew my motives, my best motives are mixed. They're mixed with good things, and don't get caught up in that. But just know this. Ananias and Sapphira is a prime example of this. Their giving was for the wrong reason. They wanted to look as spiritual as Barnabas. They wanted to look like they should be leaders in the church because of their generosity, and so they lied. And it cost them dearly. And so give from the right reason. Just spread yourself before the Lord as best as I know how, God. This is from the purest heart I have, and you know it full well. Show me, search me, and try me. See if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me to the rock that is higher than I, and he will. And so, let it be from a cheerful heart. And then why is Paul saying, our God, who is able to make all grace abound to you in all times, so that you might, the inflow, our inflow is the grace of God has been given to us. He is able to make it all about. He's just inflowing that we could have all sufficiency in all things. Why? So we've got the inflow, and then we've got this possession, and he says, let there be an outflow. Let there be an outflow. We might be tempted to read this verse in verse 8. And God is able to make all grace abound toward you, and all times having all sufficiency in all things, that you might have an abundance of material wealth, that you might have an abundance of all good health, that you might have an abundance of a great reputation without for enemies. But that's not what it says. All those alls that he gives us, all grace, all things, all sufficiency at all times, is so that we might be prepared and able to be prepared for good works, every good work. That's what it's all for. It's not so that we can be a reservoir of blessing. He gives us all these things, we possess it, and we're going to create a blessing reservoir. No, he gives us this inflow so that we can be an outflow. He calls us to be a channel of blessings, not a reservoir of blessings. And really, we were created. We were created with the intention that we would impact the earth for God's kingdom. Not with guns or swords, but with love. And so anyway, giving is the language of love. Think of that. I know there's touch, and I know there's service, and I know there's words of affirmation, but it says in John 3:16, for God so loved, he gave. And so giving is the language of love here. And then the fruit of our giving. Now may he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food supply and multiply the seed you have sown and increase the fruits of your righteousness. There's a good harvest. Fruits of righteousness. The harvest here isn't if I give $1, I'll get $100 back and I'll be able to pay off my medical bill. No, well, who could pay off a medical bill with $100? Anyway, it's not about that. It's about if I give $1, I'll have fruits of righteousness. I will be prepared for every good work. It's this idea of spiritual blessing, of participation with God, who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food. Supply and multiply the seed you have sown and increase the fruits of your righteousness, while you are enriched in everything for all liberality, which causes what? Thanksgiving through us to God. Paul's really keen and really hyped about this idea that all our giving would result in thanksgiving to God. It wouldn't result in 10% for me, for my salary. It wouldn't result in a Prius. It wouldn't result in anything. His main concern, that God be thanked. That mankind would be able to taste and see that God is good. That we would protect, not protect, but that we would magnify his reputation. That he would be thanked. So there we have thanksgiving. All this liberality causes thanksgiving to God. For the distribution and administration of this service not only supplies the needs of the saints, but also is abounding through many thanksgiving to God. Not only is it going to meet the physical needs of the saints there in Judea suffering through the famine, but it's going to create people around to give thanks to God. This is a double portion blessing. This is a good return on your investment. While through the proof of this ministry they glorify God, which is the same as thanking him, glorifying him. You did this. Who's your counselor? How did you come up with this? For the obedience of your confession to the gospel of Christ, and for your liberal sharing with them and all men. That word sharing there is koinonia. It's fellowship. It's communion. It's unity together. What's happening is this Gentile church of the Corinthians, that the Jerusalem church are like, I don't know about this gospel to the Corinth. Have they been circumcised? Do they observe the eating rules that we observe? They're all hesitating. But Paul says as a result of this gift, they're going to see the grace of God at work in your life, that they're not going to be asking questions about circumcision and about what doctrine you adhere to. Look at the love. By their love, they will know we are Christians. And so Paul's very excited about the relationship aspect of giving and receiving. There is a bonding between parties when there's a giving and a receiving. When someone has shaked your hand and had a $20 bill in their hand, it changes your perspective towards that person. Not that, I ought to treat them with favor over the person who hasn't given me anything, but they're mindful. They're praying for me. They notice. They're supporting me. Anyway, for the sharing with them and all men, and by their prayer for you who long for you, and because of the exceeding grace of God in you. It's almost as if he says, you know what's going to happen in this relational aspect of giving? Is they're going to be praying in response to you, back to you, for you. All of a sudden their heart has opened up to you where it was closed before, because the only thing they knew about you is you were Gentiles. I won't spit too hard because I'm a Christian, but now they know you're Christians who have shown your love, who've proven your love, that have reached deep into your pockets to give to them. They'll pray for you and they'll have a bond with you that did not exist before. And it all came from giving. Is it bribery? No. It's bribery if that was the only reason you're given for it. The wrong reason. It is a ministry to God that He'd be thanked, and it's a ministry to His people. Thanks be to God for His indescribable gift, the greatest giver of all, and the greatest gift of all. Cheerful giving is born of love. It is a love, loving a lover, and rejoicing in the communion. Again, giving is the language of love. For God so loved you and me and the whole world, He gave heaven's best, His only begotten Son. Amen.